Christian Bale is so fucking good.
Well, that was a movie.
Hello, welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon, and today I just saw Ford versus Ferrari. Finally, I know I'm late on this, but I'm trying to wrap up my top 10 movies of the year list. So there's a couple movies that I need to knock out right away before I could do that. So this was one, and I'm also going to be watching and reviewing Knives Out after this, so keep an eye out for that. So Ford versus Ferrari is a true story about the company Ford and a couple other people involved with them trying to compete with Ferrari to win Le Mans, which is this 24-hour race. It's directed by James Mangold and starring Christian Bale and Matt Damon, and it's a lot of fun. I'd heard, of course, rave reviews about this for a while now, and I had pretty high expectations, and it met most of them, not all of them. But I want to talk about the good stuff first because there's a lot to talk about. I'm a big critic when it comes to CGI. CGI generally annoys me, and there's a decent amount in this because you need CGI in order to do these race sequences. It's just impossible to film a race like this without actually doing a race and not use CGI. It's just impossible, so you have to use... Hello. Bye, guys. So you have to use CGI in order to make these race sequences. It would be impossible to film this movie unless you actually had a full-on race and filmed during it. It would be impossible to have this without CGI. So there's a lot of it, and there's a decent amount of it that's noticeable, but I wouldn't say it was distracting to me. It wasn't perfect, like I definitely noticed it, but it didn't take away as much from the story as oftentimes CGI does for me, where I'm just like, oh my god, that's horrible. This was just like, yeah, I saw that, and no, that didn't look real, but you know what? I still felt energized by these race scenes. It was still realistic enough that, like, I felt at times, you know, adrenaline about these shots. Like, I was invested in these races, and I felt like I was a part of it, and that was amazing to me. Is I'm not into car movies ever, really, and I'm not into sports movies that often because it's hard to recreate the feeling of actual sports or actual excitement in a movie like this, and they did it really well. And that's the best thing I can say about this movie, aside from Christian Bale and Matt Damon are both amazing in this, and they're always great. Christian Bale especially, he's maybe the best actor working today. I love him. He's so good, and he's really good in this, and most of the cast around them is really good too. I will say the little kid bugged me. He's honestly not even really that little of a kid, but regardless, he's Christian Bale's character's son, and at first I liked him. He was enjoyable, but like after a while his character got kind of annoying, whereas like he said every line like he was Oliver Twist asking for more porridge, like a wide-eyed, like, oh, he needs to make up 2 laps. Oh my goodness, did you ask him about the brakes? Oh, and it's like every line was that. It's like, okay, go away now. And that kind of is partially the writing in this movie was there was a lot of exposition. It's like at every point they're explaining something to the audience because they don't trust you to keep up with the races, especially where it's like Christian Bale's character gets lapped in a race by another character, and they're like, oh, now he needs to pass him 2 times. Then he gets back around. Oh, now he needs to pass him 1 more time still. He passed him once, but he needs to do it again. It's like, thank you. And that was a problem with this movie, is it really did feel like it thought that the audience was going to be a bunch of idiots, and it had to be careful as to make sure that everything was crystal clear to the lowest common denominator. So that was frustrating. And I will say, I enjoyed this movie. I would not have enjoyed this movie if Christian Bale and Matt Damon weren't in it. And that's not a good thing, because, yeah, they were great and they made me want to watch it. They made me enjoy the movie. But if they hadn't been in it, or if they had been portrayed by somebody not as fascinating to me, I would never want to watch this movie again. Even now, I'm not that interested in rushing out to see it again or anything like that. I enjoyed it thoroughly. It's gonna make my top 10 list. Like I said, I'm working on that list, and it's gonna make that list. Granted, this year's been a little bit weak, so that might be part of why, but I enjoyed it. And the reason I enjoyed it was predominantly Christian Bale, followed secondly by Matt Damon, and then followed thirdly by the races. But the story itself is predictable and boring. I get it. It's a true life story for the most part, you know? So you can't change the story that much, but it's just the way they set up stuff and the way they say things, you can tell they're building to a plot point later in the movie. Like, you can't say certain lines and not expect me to know that's going to come up later. And I don't want to give anything away by saying said lines, but it's like, it would be horrible if that bridge collapsed. Good thing it doesn't. You know it's gonna collapse later, and like, there's no collapsing bridges in this, but you get the idea. Like, that's how they talk at several points during this movie, and it's like, okay, so that's gonna come up later. And it happens like 3 or 4 times in this movie where it's like, stop giving away the plot by telling me ahead of time. I don't need that. You can just show it to me when it happens. And there's just cheesy things with different characters. There's this one specific character who's just, he hates Christian Bale and Matt Damon, and he's trying to overrule everything they do, and it's like, it gets a bit redundant and a bit cheesy eventually. And there are plot points that revolve around that, so it's necessary, but it's like, I don't know, it just could have been done better. And what I had heard about this movie was like that it was amazing. Like, people were saying that it was awesome and that it was movie of the year, and then people kind of seem to forget about it, and I get why. This movie isn't memorable in any way. It's a standard sports driving movie, true life story movie. Aside from Christian Bale and Matt Damon, there's nothing memorable about this movie, and that's why I wouldn't have enjoyed it if they weren't in it, because I'm not a big car guy. I don't enjoy racing. I don't watch racing, so that's it. If that's your thing, you might enjoy this movie more aside from them, but for the average person who doesn't care about that, they're the only reason this movie is good. And yeah, it helps a lot. They do make the movie genuinely good. Even if they weren't in it, it wouldn't be bad per se, it just wouldn't be memorable in any way, and that's kind of an issue. Like, honestly, speaking of how unmemorable it is, I'm like struggling to remember plot points to talk about, and I'm like, are there spoilers to talk about? I don't know, I guess there's a few. My recommendation is go ahead and watch it. It's probably more of a theater movie because of the race scenes. That makes it fun, and the acting is really good among the few lead characters. I mean, it's also got Jon Bernthal in it. He's not that big of a role, but he's always good. So it's got some really, really solid acting as a whole, and then 2 specific actors who are awesome in this movie. So go ahead and check it out if you guys haven't yet. It's probably better to see it now while it's still in theaters, but also it's probably worth a watch on DVD later too. But yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about it other than that. It's a pretty basic ABC plot. Like, there's not a whole lot going on here that you won't see coming, if anything at all, and then you might kind of forget about it in a couple of days, but you won't regret watching it while you're watching it. I don't think that would be the case. So that's what I thought, but I am going to talk about a couple of spoilers. There's a couple things to talk about, a couple more nitpicks, a couple more compliments to pay it, but that's what I thought spoiler free. So thanks for watching, guys. If you're new here, please subscribe, and don't forget to like and share. Thanks, guys. Bye. So, speaking of spoilers, there is one plot point that I wanted to bring up where Christian Bale hasn't been paying taxes or something, so the IRS takes his garage away from him and all of his tools, so he's out of a job, essentially. That's how this movie kind of starts. He tells his wife, all right, I'm gonna quit racing, I'm gonna quit working on cars, I'm gonna get a real job, and that's how I'll provide for you guys. And she's not excited for that. She's like, but I know you want to keep racing, and I know you have to keep racing, and that's what you were meant to do. And she's very supportive of that goal and that dream that he has, and she's sad for him that he's giving it up. And then later, when the opportunity arises for him to get paid to go back into racing and manufacturing cars and stuff with Matt Damon, she holds him hostage and speeds along these roads, terrifying him until he tells her what's going on. And then when he tells her, she starts screaming at him and saying, you said you were done, you said you were done. It was completely out of character as far as we knew up until this point. There was no reason for her to react that way as far as we know, because because she seemed to love him racing. She seemed to love everything about that and was sad that he was giving it up. And then she kind of flips it and says, well, I don't mind that you're doing it. I'm mad that you're lying to me. And it's like, why? Like, that took me immediately out of the experience, and this movie is an experience. It's not going to be something that you'll spend time with your friends debating for years to come. There's nothing to talk about this movie. It was just like, hey, did you see that movie? Yeah, it was fun. It's like a roller coaster. You'll enjoy it, but I'm not going to be remembering it for years and going, man, can't wait to do that again. If you're taken off the ride in the middle of the ride to scratch your head and go, why'd we do that? That takes away from the experience, and this whole movie is an experience, so that was frustrating. Another thing that was weird and frustrating to me was during the race, the final race, the Le Mans, the 24 hours of Le Mans, you've got Matt Damon kind of cheating throughout the race, but not really, but also not doing good stuff. So like, he steals stopwatches from the Italians, and then he fake sabotages them where he drops like a nut where their car was, so they'll think that they didn't put it in the car or back on the car. And neither of those subplots lead anywhere. The stopwatches are used for literally nothing but timing his laps to go, he broke another record, he's going really fast. And it's like, we already had the PA people saying that. Why did we need the stopwatches for that? And then he drops the nut, and the Italians freak out for all of 1 second about it, like, what's that do there? What do you got? What? And that's it. It never comes back up again. You don't see the driver pull into pit stop. You don't see anything with that. And it's just like, why did that happen then? And then I guess the biggest spoiler of the movie is that Christian Bale, I guess there's two things. So Christian Bale loses on a technicality, which is frustrating, but if it happened, it happened. So that's life. It's frustrating. People suck. Nothing really to talk about that other than it's frustrating, disappointing, but you can't change history, so okay. But then the other big spoiler is then he actually dies during practice run, and I just didn't think that was necessary to keep in the movie. Like, maybe they thought that they can't end on a high note if this life story of this guy's a tragedy, but like, that didn't seem like it was part of the story. Like, everybody dies. Just because you're doing a biopic or a true life story doesn't mean you have to end the movie with the character dying. It's like you're doing like a war movie, and it's like about this guy who gets saved from the war, and then you follow him for the next 40 years until he dies of old age, and you're like, man, he died. Was it all worth it? Yes! Why are we showing the death? That has nothing to do with anything. Like, everybody dies eventually. So that was odd to me and didn't really seem to fit. It seemed like a tacked on ending. I said before I started the spoilers that I was going to pay it a couple more compliments along with the nitpicks. I didn't have any in mind when I said that. I was just trying to not give anything away to the non-spoiler viewers. Let's think of some real quick. The main thing I can really say about this is that the racing was genuinely fun. It really was. And like I said, that's not my thing. I don't watch racing movies generally. I don't know how many car movies there are, but like, I don't watch Fast and Furious or anything like that. I don't care for movies like that. This made me excited during the scenes, especially the opening scene, even though the opening scene was probably the most CGI it got. But I felt like I was in that car for like a second, and that was exciting, and I really enjoyed that. I likened the movie to a roller coaster, and that was similar. It was almost like a VR experience or whatever, and it was so exciting when they had these race scenes, and that's impressive. Like, that's really good filmmaking. I know James Mangold's made some good movies before. This isn't his strongest performance as a director, but it's still, you can see his ability to make a good scene throughout this movie. I wouldn't say every scene was memorable or every scene was well crafted, but you can see his ability sprinkled in throughout there. Not saying it's as good as Walk the Line or Logan or anything like that. It wasn't to me, but it was still very enjoyable in those moments. And in the moment, I'm glad I watched the movie. Am I going to buy this movie and watch it later or try and see it again before it drops out of theaters? Probably not. Like, I don't think that I really want to see the movie again, but I'm not mad that I watched it. And not every movie is meant to be watched more than once, and this one isn't for me. But that's just my opinion. What do you guys think? A lot of people have a lot of different opinions, so let me know in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and if you're new here, subscribe. Thanks, guys. Bye.